Welcome to Seek, Go, Create. This is the place for the seekers, the goers, the creators, those people that are creating the lives that they were built and designed to have. And we always tell people this is kind of where leadership, business, and ministry all comes together. So thank you for joining us today. I have a great guest. I've been excited about talking to this guy for a few weeks since I started doing some research on him. And so we're going to have fun. Before I get to him, let me just mention a few things. We love to share information here, but what we really love is when the conversation continues beyond just these next 60 minutes. So if you are watching this on YouTube, listening to it on the podcast, or watching it on one of the social channels that we go live on, and you're seeing a replay, jump down to the comments or jump down to wherever the platform is that you can give us feedback and just keep the conversation going. Ask a question, make a comment, agree, disagree. We would welcome any of that. And, one other sidebar, a new platform that we are experimenting with and looking at is Clubhouse. So if any of you are on Clubhouse, you could find us at Seek, Go, Create, because one of the things we're going to begin experimenting with, probably about the time this podcast goes live, is we're going to start having conversations with our guest on Clubhouse post or after the podcast going live. So keep an eye out for that and join us there. So today we have, listen to this. I'm going to read some quick things and then we're going to have him give some information on his background. We have an 8th degree black belt. I'm going to have to even have him describe and explain what that means because I know that's incredible. Former national champion, speaker, author, coach, master of the champion's mindset. Our guest today is Chris Natzke. Chris, welcome. Natzke, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We said that. Natzke. We talked about that earlier and I said the wrong thing. I apologize. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here.
It's so glad to have you here. This is the first question I like to ask after I mess up pronouncing someone's name is, why don't you just, we bump into each other somewhere and we're chit chatting and I just say, hey, Chris, tell me what you do. What would you tell me?
Yeah. I guess in a few words, Tim, is I inspire, lead, teach, and empower others to realize their full potential and happiness by helping them discover their own inner champions.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to repeat those first 3 words again.
Sure.
Inspire.
Inspire, lead, teach, empower.
Okay. Because here's what I'm going to do right out of the gate, because I always get some of my great questions from there. I'm going to ask you to converse just briefly about each one of those. So let's start with the word inspire, because that's a great word. But tell me what inspire means to you.
Yeah. See, I just have a real deep belief that each one of us has this power inside of us, and we connect with that God source, if you will, inside of us. And when we do that, that whole inspiration is what really is, for me, the building blocks of what enables us to do amazing things in this life. I mean, there's a lot of, it's like I have a friend of mine say, as if, if how-tos were all it took, we'd all be rich, happy, and thin, right? So it isn't just about the things that we know what to do, but it's about the inspiration to make those things happen. And I find in my own life and in the people that I coach and that I work with, that when we tap into our own inspiration, the things that really inspire us and get us moving, and we can create that in our lives and in our careers, that's when we're the most happy.
Yeah. All right. So that's good. I'm going to jump to the last word you mentioned, which was empower, out of the 4, those first 4. Yeah. So do the same thing. Do a little riff with us just for that word empower.
Absolutely. Well, I think that sometimes some of the root of our greatest unhappiness as well as our discord in our lives and in our society is because people don't feel fully empowered. They've had times in their lives where that's been taken away from them, or they've thought that was taken away from them. And I'm not talking about power from a standpoint of projecting and trying to overpower someone. I'm talking about that sense of calm strength, because when we feel that inside of ourselves, I believe that we want nothing more than everyone else to feel that same way. And if everyone felt that way, man, the world would be a much, much different and better place, I believe.
Well, I do want to say, you and I had a conversation before we flipped the mic on. I knew we were going to have a fun conversation, but just you starting out with those four words, I mean, I love the word lead and teach also, but I love the bookend around those four words you have of inspire and empower. And I think at times we know in our culture there's a lot of words that might be, I don't want to say overused, that's not the right word. Maybe they're used incorrectly,
Hmm.
but from really looking at some of the things you're doing, I truly do believe there's an intentionality with those words. So I think we're going to have fun with this. But before we get too deep into all of that, I love to go deep fast because the thing that we really want to land on, I think, is that champion's mindset. That is something that seems to be a foundation to all that you do. But I want to get a little bit of background first because I need some education. May the listener may also on the martial arts background that you have because I think it's a key to some of your success. So I need you to explain to me. I know there's first degree, second degree, but come on, eighth degree black belt. Is that really a thing? You're not fudging there, are you? Come on.
No, I'm not fudging you. No, no, no. So think about martial arts in this way. I mean, everybody has a pretty good understanding that when somebody starts, they're a white belt, right? And when they have some form of mastery or expertise, or at least what we call in my system in Taekwondo, that when you get black belt, you've basically mastered the basics. That's really what you've done. But then the journey really begins from there, if you really want to get honest about it, because you've just kind of installed. It's kind of like, I guess, graduating high school. You've got a basic set of skills, but now how are you going to take that? And the way that I like to explain it in the martial art of Taekwondo, which I study and have been for the last 4.5 decades, there are 9 degrees of black belt. And think of it this way, the first 3 degrees of black belt, first, second, and third, is like, those are the fighters, right? Those are the warriors. They're out in the ring and doing their thing. And fourth through sixth is like the teachers, right? They're the ones that are the instructors. And then when you look at the 7th through the 9th degree, we hopefully, because of our experience and our worldly, the lessons we've learned, is we become the philosophers. And, it's an interesting thing is when you look in martial arts, many times you see the people that have been around the longest and really have, found a sense of mastery in what they don't become the combaters and the destroyers anymore. They become the healers, right? Either healing through their words, or some do it through touch and, medicine or whatever. But it's really about finding all those aspects of ourselves. But then when it really comes down to it, it's about how do you make the world a better place? And you do it through healing.
Yeah. So, all right. Gosh, that's so powerful. There's so many things there. What did you learn about yourself along the way? Because that
Oh man.
obviously is a long process. Let's jump
Yeah.
back to that first degree. Tell me
Yeah.
when that was. When did you achieve
Yeah.
that? And how many years that took? And just maybe give us a few learning points about yourself.
Sure.
Because to me, I think the power of that level of mastery is self-actualization, maybe Maslow's learning about yourself and being comfortable with that as much as about others. Tell me about
Right.
that.
Right. Well, I received my first degree black belt on August 27th, 1977.
Ooh.
I remember that because it was the day before my father's birthday. And the man who I received my black belt from is still my instructor to this day. His name is Grandmaster J.K. Lee. He lives in Milwaukee, and I was a Wisconsin kid growing up. And I share this story often, but I think it's good to give context to how I started. I started my martial art training in '73 before Master Lee came to the United States because I loved the TV show Kung Fu. And you probably remember that as well, right? And there was nothing greater than that. And when I walked into that class for the first time, I'm like, oh my God, I'm home.
I want
But
to
then
pause you.
Grandmaster Lee came into
I
my,
want hold on. I want to pause you just 1 second because I actually had this fleeting thought about the show Kung Fu recently.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so here's the good and the bad of this, Chris, because I want to pause this story. We're going to jump right back to it. We just made a reference that there's a good likelihood that 90% of people out there that are listening in don't know the reference. So I'm going to
yeah,
ask you as a brief pause and then just
sure,
keep going in the story.
absolutely.
Tell people what Kung Fu was, the
Right,
show.
right. And thanks for asking. Thanks for asking. I know when I use this in my keynote talk, I usually raise my hand to see how many people have actually heard of the show. So all the old people raise their hand, right? So this was a series, I believe it started in 72, went through 74, and it was a series of a Shaolin monk named Kwai Chang Caine, who was walking across the American desert. He was fleeing the authorities in China, and he would go into this town and the next, and guys would try to beat him up, and he'd take care of him using his kung fu. And, when you're 10 years old, you see that's the coolest thing you've ever seen in your life, right? So I literally begged my mom to let me go to my first class. And it was like everything opened up. I felt like I was totally home.
Do you
So that's
remember?
kind of the reference.
Do you remember there was a saying that described Kung Fu as like he's traveling as a wanderer, fighting for justice or something? I can't remember the exact saying.
Yeah, I can't remember. I mean, clearly he was Grasshopper, right? I mean,
He
that
was
was his
grass. Yeah,
nickname from
it was so
Master
powerful.
Po, right? But yeah, transformational. And what many people don't know is that that role was supposedly first written for Bruce Lee. And the network said he looked too Chinese. So he got angry, went to Hong Kong, and then became an international superstar. So it worked out for him as well. But that's what got me started in the martial arts. And then 3 years after that, I met Grandmaster Lee. And this is the one story that I love sharing. I was in the classroom getting ready before the class started, and I was seated with my legs spread wide. I was stretching out, getting ready for the training. And he walked on the mat, and he has this amazing presence, right? And he starts surveying all the students. And pretty soon I realized he's looking directly at me. And before I could stand up and move, he had come over and sat down in front of me. And he put his right foot on the inside of one leg, his left foot on the inside of the other. He grabbed the end of my martial art belt, and with one push pull, split me out to 180 degrees. And as I like to joke, I learned 2 lessons that day. Number one, anyone can do the splits once. But the other thing is he looked me in the eyes, and this is really the whole basis of what I do today. He looked me in the eyes and he said to me in his broken English, he said, "I will make you a champion. I will make you a champion." And that is a definitive time in my life, because all of a sudden someone who I loved, I admired, I respected, claimed my greatness for me. And I figured at 13 years old, well, if he thinks that, it must be true. And it put me on a whole different trajectory in my life.
Did you have any, I don't know if perception is the right word, clue, understanding of potential for you? Did you kind of go in, some people go into a new environment with a swagger, like, I'm kind of all that. They usually get humbled pretty quickly, but we won't go into that. Or did you go in just kind of like, I want to be like Kung Fu, I want to be like
Oh,
David Carradine's character? What
well,
what was your mindset? Because we're going to talk mindset all throughout
yeah,
this.
yeah.
And someone they prophesied into your soul, into your life. Did that resonate? Did you go, huh? Or what? Do you recall?
Well, you know what I'd love to share, Tim, because that's such a wonderful question. I did not at all go in there with any type of swagger. I was 13 years old. I was scared to death. I saw this man I was in awe of. I had to travel. It wasn't like martial arts schools today where there's one at every corner. I had to travel 30 miles to train with him. And now I'm in an area of the city of Milwaukee that I've never been to before. I'm, all these people I don't know. And so at the moment when he said that, I immediately thought, well, trophies and tournaments and whatever. But I always love to share this. What I've really learned over the course of my life is he always talked about being a life champion, a champion in life. And that's what started to open up for me, how to have this great, powerful vision for our lives, how to move through obstacles with grace and strength, and also how to live a life of service. And that's what I have come to learn throughout the decades afterwards. That's what he really meant.
Wow. Now there's some, I may show my ignorance about martial arts. If so, please feel free to correct me. But to me, our son did karate for a brief period of time. And I would go, and it was one of these martial arts. We were outside of Atlanta, one of the places on the corner, and they do kind of churn a lot of younger kids through those. And that's good. I think they teach a lot of great principles, but it seemed like at that stage, it was more about technique and movement and maybe gaining confidence.
Yeah.
But you mentioned at the beginning some things that made me wonder, or maybe this is my perception, or maybe we're going back to Kung Fu, I don't know, that it is really spirit, soul, and body. It's like, it's really everything about who you are. It's not just a physical breaking a board or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because again, everything to me is layering on the mindset. And so related, if you, I know you can, but just tell me, educate me on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question and a great observation. And I think not all martial arts schools are the same, right?
Mhm.
I was very blessed to have someone who our training had the martial art philosophy as well as the physical and some very arduous physical training at that was all molded into one. So there was really no separation. You know, we had those principles input into us, and that for me became a template. And then as I grew into an adult, that's what continued to make my journey a thirst for continual personal development and spiritual work and expansion, and integrate that even more. See, because I think that if we don't do that, if we don't integrate that in martial arts, we create street fighters, we create people that can kick and punch. But what you want to do is you want to create someone who understands the power that they have developed, but they do so from a standpoint of humility, knowing that if they need to use it, they can, but they can also take those basic principles and lessons and apply them to every aspect of their life. See, that's where it becomes really, really powerful. I mean, heck, the last time I got in a fight was I was 11 years old, right? But I use my martial arts every day. And hopefully my students do the same. They learn and they apply those lessons.
Yeah. All right. That's good. All right. So continuing along the theme, especially going back to something you said earlier, there had to be a time. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about 13-year-old Chris, and I'm envisioning. Were you, I mean, was there any? Were you athletic? Did you enjoy other sports,
Yeah.
or I
Yeah.
hate to say, were you just like I hate to say this, like scrawny kid stepping into, martial
Right,
arts?
right,
I mean,
right.
give me a little visual of you. Or you were like a
Yeah.
already.
Totally. No, I wasn't scrawny kid. In fact, just the opposite. I was a little heavy, a little
Oh, okay.
chubby. In fact, it wasn't too long before that I would get teased and be called Chris Fatsky at school. So there
Okay.
was this image of, and by the time I met Grandmaster Lee, I started to grow and, move into puberty, and I started to stretch out a little bit. But no, I was a good athlete. And then as a result, I know of martial art training, I became a very good athlete. I eventually became an all-state football player and was a scholarship athlete in college, playing football at Northwestern University. And I can almost guarantee that would have never come to that point had it not been for my martial art training. So there was definitely a transformation. And the other thing I'll share is it was a very unique time in martial arts history in the United States. When we think of martial arts now, just like you said with your child in Atlanta, with your son, it's oftentimes nowadays considered a kid's activity. That was before the Karate Kid movies came out. When I was training, I was 10, 11, 14 years old with a whole bunch of adults. So there was no room to hide or to be the little kid. I had to step up with everyone else.
Yeah. All right, man. We are throwing some awesome references to people with Kung Fu and Karate Kid. We're not going to go into Karate Kid, but
Okay.
at the beginning, you mentioned when you talked about the belt progression
Yeah.
and moving from, I guess, maybe warrior fighter to maybe teacher to then philosopher and maybe mentor. And I guess what I would love to find out from you, were you hyper aware as you were moving through those stages? Were you only aware later? And let me tell you the reason why I'm asking this. One of the underlying themes of us at Seek Go Create on this show is we really talk a lot about redefining success. And many times when we're, I don't want to say immature, but let's just say less mature, we think success is X.
Yeah.
But as we go through things and mature, and you maybe move through those progressions, you move through life, you go through things yourself, good, the bad, the ugly, we kind of get a different perspective of that success. So I mashed a couple things together there, but I could tell you've got the capacity to really play
Yeah.
with that. So talk about the progression. fighter, warrior to teacher, then to philosopher, and then maybe weave in maybe how you redefine success
Yeah.
along the way. Is that something you could
Okay.
do for us?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is when you're in those early bouts and you're training. And for me, I had these martial art heroes and, people I wanted to aspire to. And it was all about fighting and strength and power, kind of like being a superhero, right? And I can remember a time in my life that was quintessential. And it was again with Grandmaster Lee. And I love sharing this story because it was so, again, profound in my life. I got my black belt, my junior black belt when I was 14. And I was probably around 15 years old. And Grandmaster Lee, after class, used to have us all huddle in his office around his desk. And he would tell us stories about Korean culture and martial arts in Korea, et cetera. And because of his accent, he was very difficult for many people to understand. And so he would start talking, and then people would trail off, whether maybe they had someplace to go, maybe they couldn't understand him, but I could always understand him, always, always understand him. And one day we were sitting there, everybody had trailed off, and that was just he and I. And you know how sometimes our kids, or when we're a child, we will ask adults a question we already know the answer to. We kind of want to test them. So I was, again, 15 years old, and I already knew this. In Japanese martial arts, there's a term called sensei for teacher. The Korean equivalent is called sabum nim, means honored instructor, sabum nim. So it was just he and I sitting there and across his desk, and I said, "Sir, what does sabum nim mean?" Of course, I already knew the answer, but he paused, and then he looked at me and he said, "Sabum nim means father." Boom, directly in the heart. I can remember that moment like it was yesterday. And the context for me, I was growing up in a household where my father was alcoholic. He was in the home, but it was a real difficult time at home. And it wasn't, when I heard his words, I wasn't hearing, "I'm going to be your father." That's not what I heard. What I heard was, "I'm here as that father for you if you need, and importantly, if you choose this path, you need to be ready to play that role for others as well." So I love telling that story because I think that's another shifting point in my life, because now teaching martial arts took on a whole new meaning to me. That you talk about success. It wasn't just about, making money doing, although money's important. It was about how can I impact people's lives and play that role for them, just like it was played for me.
Yeah. Wow. That whole image of father is such a powerful image. And you know what? It's such a challenged image for so many people today in culture because, like you said, the situation you grew up in, you had, if all of a sudden someone mentions father, it just means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah,
And I believe, you probably believe similar, that it also impacts the relation with our heavenly father, because if you perceive
absolutely.
a father as being a certain way, violent, mean, alcoholic, never says a word, uncaring, unloving, whatever it might be, many times we look at the heavenly father that way. So that was really
Absolutely.
good. So now at some point along the way, you began moving into your professional career. And what I'd love to do, and maybe we'll do kind of a condensed version here if we can, because I want to get to
Sure.
all that you're doing now and how you've used the sum total of all your experience and background to be a blessing to people in the current environment. But give a little bit of experience, maybe business, corporate, and things along the
Sure.
way so that we can get some context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. Well, so I told you that I played football at Northwestern University, and the last week of my football career, the offensive line coach came up to me, and I knew him, but I didn't play for him. I played inside linebacker, and he said, "Hey, Procter and Gamble wants to speak with you next week. Are you available?" And I said, "Well, coach, I got nothing else going on. The season's over." So I met with P&G on the following Tuesday, met with him again on Wednesday, met with him again on Thursday, and by mid-December, I had a job. So I started my corporate career with Procter and Gamble in sales in Chicago, and continued to move up through the ladder. Did really well. Started in Chicago, went to Southern California, took a special assignment in Cincinnati in the corporate offices, and then came out to Denver. So in about span of about 8 years, 3 promotions, 3 moves, et cetera, and really thought that that's what I was going to be doing the rest of my life. I have nothing but great memories and great things to say about my experience with P&G. But there was always this gnawing of, hey, the martial art thing, you always said you wanted to do that. And we're no longer together, but my wife at the time was such a blessing in this regard. She said, we love Denver. The boys love it here. We know if you get promoted, it's another move, but she and I were high school sweethearts. She said, I know you've always wanted to open up a martial arts school. Why don't you go for it? And so what a blessing she was. And so I opened it and never looked back. I mean, I left P&G after a 10-year career, but as soon as I started the school, talk about everything in alignment when we're in alignment with our purpose. Within a year, 200 students, and the average school in the United States was 80 students. Within a year, I have 200. Within 5 years, I got 500 students at one location. It just, it was changed the total trajectory of my life. And now when I look back at it, it wouldn't be that I wouldn't have had a good life in the corporate arena, but I've had 1,200 students or more that have got their black belt with me, tens of thousands I've been able to teach and impact. And just what a blessing, just what a blessing. And so, what I would say to everyone is, if you've got that in your heart, listen to it, listen to it.
So one of the things that often happens when people have conversations like this, Chris, is that we hit the high points. It's kind of like I joke with people about what happens on social media. We only show the good stuff.
Yeah.
You and I were talking just briefly. You were kind of asking, say, hey, you live in an RV. What's the story there? How did that happen? And I kind of went through our short background, that it wasn't an exciting journey, but boy, what a blessing it is to be where we are now. When we say things like you just went through, usually we kind of hit the high points, but without going too deep into it, talk about a few of the hurdles or the bumps or the difficult things along the way that you've learned from, or that you just want to share, whatever. I'll just kind of leave it open to you, because those are really some of the inflection points along the way that really form us and make us who we are. So can you give a few of those for us?
Oh my gosh. Thanks for asking that question, because I've actually now come to a point in my life where I really love sharing the story I'm going to share with you. I think at first I was a little bit hesitant, but for me, I had success in the corporate world, I had success in the athletic world, et cetera. And now I'm going to venture off into this new business. And outside of Grandmaster Lee, I've had no role models in my family about doing the business on my own. And I've got 2 young sons, I've got a wife, and I'm the breadwinner, et cetera. So not only was this the most exciting time in my life, it was also the most petrifying time in my life. And the closer I was getting to it, the more anxiety was coming up, the more fear was surfacing. So much so that I started having panic attacks. And in fact, one day after going through a panic attack while I was still at P&G, with only one of my friends knowing I was leaving, I had a full-blown panic attack, had to excuse myself. Up until then, I had 1 sick day in 10 years, right? So they're like, oh man, he must really be sick. That's what I told my boss. And I called my church, I called my minister's office, and I asked to see someone. And so I was able to go and see Minister Dr. Marjorie Strom. And literally within minutes, I was on her floor in the fetal position. So wrought with fear. What happens if this fails? What will happen to my family? I'm thinking, I look back at it now and I laugh, but at 33 years old, at the time, I thought, if this fails, I'm done, right? My life's over. And she cleaned me up. And I literally had a student belt testing that night. So, the students test for the new belts. And because I was teaching at a grade school at the time before we moved to the new facility. And I did it without a hitch. Without a hitch. No one knew anything was wrong. I rose to the occasion. And as soon as we ended, I crashed again. So my former wife took me to the hospital here in Denver, Swedish hospital, admitted me into the emergency room, and I spent the night there sedated. And they told me when I woke up in the morning, they said, Chris, if you wouldn't have been such a well-conditioned athlete, you would have gone into cardiac arrest. So now I obviously made it on the other side. I made it with a lot of, deep introspection, a lot of faith, a lot of support from amazing people along the way. But I love sharing that story because I think sometimes, as you said, we only think of the high points, or people hear the high points. And that was petrifying to me. But now coming out of that, it's one of the best things that ever happened, because I realized how I needed to rely on something bigger than myself to get through that.
Yeah. All right. That's good. I've got, we're getting a rhythm here on this conversation we're having. So you probably are recognizing how things fire away in my head. And we're going to talk about your book in just a moment, but one of I guess the subtitle is Discovering Your Inner Champion.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that's out in the world today that's called the imposter syndrome. And what you just shared to me, 33 years old, probably felt maybe invincible in some ways, but then all of a sudden you're in the fetal position in, a doctor or a minister's office, counselor's office.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna mention those 3 or 4 things to you. You've got anxiety, breakdown, almost literal, imposter syndrome. Is that when the inner champion began to develop inside you? Because most people would never put all those words together. Most people
Yeah. You
can't
know
see
what?
inner champion.
I'll tell you what, I love that you pointed that out, because if I get really introspective and think about it, you're absolutely right. Because I think the inner champion gets accessed when we, as I said, we realize there's something bigger than ourselves that we're tapping into. And we don't do that when things are going great. when the money's coming in and the career's going great and the relationships are great, we don't think of it then. It's those times when we're down. That's when we go, whoa, if I'm going to get up, I got to rely on something bigger than myself. And then when we discover that, then what happens is it becomes this wonderful template and example for us to deal with challenges in the future, because it doesn't end there, right? We're going to continue to get challenges, but then we always have that. Like, that for me is a reference point. It's kind of like, if I can get through that, I can get through this, what I have in front of me, right?
Yeah, it's
So
like
I would
this
agree
muscle.
with you. I guess I've never really thought of it that way, but you're right. That was where the seeds started, because when you're at that low point and you think you're Mr. Tough Karate guy, and all of a sudden you're rolling around in somebody's office and you can't even get your head off a pillow for 2 weeks afterwards. Yeah, you need to start looking at things a little differently.
Well, I love it. And I love the conversation we're having, because I love when people talk about all the success and how they, achieved this and did that and all that. I love all that. But here's what I've come to know at the age that I am. I'm 57. You and I are maybe close. You might be a few years younger, older, something
Just
like
turned
that.
58 yesterday, brother. Just turned 58
Woo! And you
yesterday.
know
Yeah,
what? We
yeah.
are looking good, feeling good. I tell
That's
you
right.
what, we
That's
are,
right.
we are, some people are looking at going, woo, look at those good looking dudes.
That's right. There you
Or,
go.
or if they're not, please don't comment in any of the forums there. Just let us keep thinking that.
There you
But
go.
but I think back on my journey, and I use the word journey because what we do many times is we look at events, and there's an event where we're up on a stage, we're getting accolades, we're getting that belt, we're getting that next level, we're getting that award for sales, we're getting whatever. But that's not when that occurred. It occurred at 13 years old when your Grandmaster Lee spoke to you and spoke into your life and said, you're a champion. And then that low point that you just mentioned. And one thing, I'm going to fast forward here, and then what we're going to do in just a moment, I want you to give us a few of the 7 keys to creating life of
Sure.
purpose from your
Sure.
book. And we'll let people know how they can get the book, and we can talk about that. But we are probably, depending on when people listen to this, about 12 months in here in the United States into a pandemic that's impacted the entire world. I I would venture to say that if anyone were to say they have not been impacted, I would want to kind of shake them a little bit. I said, "Are you sure you haven't been impacted? Because this has impacted a lot of things in life." So, Chris, what I'd love for you to do, I mean, I don't, it may have had an impact on you because I know you speak and probably
Yeah.
your keynote and things like that. Maybe share a little bit about how it's impacted you, and then maybe speak to, overcoming to some people that may still be kind of going through some things, businesses or collapsing. And we still have, I
Yeah.
think, a long way to go financially on some things, but talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear your impact. I talk to a lot of speakers and authors, and then we're going to move into your 7 keys to creating a life of
Awesome.
purpose.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting you bring that up because when I look back at 2020, it started out as it was going to be my best year ever speaking. I had in the first 2 months, 13 talks. It was like, it was rolling. I'm like, man, on this pace, I'm going to have like 60 talks this year. And then boom, everything hit.
How'd
And
that work out for you? How'd that work
yeah,
out for you?
right. How'd that work out for me? And now I had other things lined up, coaching and some other things, but then some of those started to peel away as well. And I think the first thing that I guess I would say about that is that, and I know it becomes a cliche, but when one door opens, another or closes, another one opens, and there were times like what am I going to do with my day now? Because I had all these other projects I was working on, but I took the opportunity. I wrote another book. I did another online program. I developed my website. So that's just from a practical standpoint that kept me busy. But the other thing that I did is I guess I realized that when we're in those places, when they're in those places of challenge, it's about getting really present where we are right now and then looking to do the next right thing and the next right thing. Because when I get too far ahead of myself, that's when I get into worry and fear. And one of the things that I shared during one of my keynote talks, I talk about this study that was done years ago where it was called the worry cure. And they brought these people together and they had them list all the things they were worried about happening in the next 30 days upcoming. So they made this total list and they handed it in, and then they had them come back 32 days later. And what they found is that 85% of the things they worried about on that list and they noted never happened. And now I know what many listeners are saying, well, 15% did, right? But of the 15%, 79% of the 15% either happened and it wasn't as bad as they thought it would be, or they were happy it occurred because they learned from it. So then it's like 97% of the things we worry about either never happen or they serve us. So I had to start, when things started getting a little tight for me, I had to start leaning into that. I'm like, okay, I do this for a living. I got to start living this. And things just continue to unfold beautifully. So, and it didn't come without any challenge and worry and fear, but I was taken care of, to be sure.
Yeah, I think that there are going to be many people, and my hope is that it's all over the world. And my hope is that it's not just millions, it's not just hundreds of millions, that there are billions of people that are going to gain clarity. They're going to, understand what they're created and designed to be through this process. Because I know that it even helped me. I mean, both of us are kind of mindset coach type guys. I don't know about you, but man, March, April, May, I put clients on pause, business things, and I was watching too much news and things like that. And I was just like going, you know what? I know how this mindset stuff works, and I'm kind of faltering. What are the
Right.
people out there that don't know how it works?
Totally.
What do you think?
Totally. I'm totally there. And that's why I'm saying it's like we do this for a living, right? And that's one of the things I think that's cool about martial arts, at least I looked at, is I needed to always keep myself at the top of my game because I was kind of the product. And I think the same thing goes in coaching and speaking. People, audiences, coaching clients, they can detect inauthenticity a mile away, right? We have to be living what we say we teach or coach or whatever. And so, yeah, there were a couple of times when I had to take a hard look at myself and say, where is that mindset? Where are you allowing that to drift? And, but you know what? It's like they say, when someone is, a pilot's flying a plane, 99% of the time it's off course. Our lives are about readjusting, and it's not so much being off course. It's about being aware and then correcting. That's when we're moving forward.
That's so good. And that lesson that you learned, I think everyone will learn this lesson. It's just really valuable the sooner we learn it as opposed to later. And that is that there's a bigger picture. We're not necessarily in control of all the things we think we're in control of. That's what I've had to revisit the last 12 months. How about you?
Absolutely. And it's like surrendering to that, right? It isn't about giving in, it's about giving up the things that aren't serving us, right? That negative mindset, those habits that aren't working, because people think surrendering to it is weakness. It's really the biggest area of strength we can show, when you really get down to it.
Yeah. And just kind of spiritually, there's so much power in just saying, you know
Totally.
what? I'm going to put in the action that I'm supposed to put in today, plant the seeds. And you know what? God's just going to have to take it and grow it and do what he
There you
does with
go.
it, because I don't have that much control over it.
Amen.
So,
Well, one of my teachers told me, and I use this phrase a lot, is that, you're right, all that intentionality and that movement, it's because God meets us at the point of action,
yeah,
right?
which
That's
is,
where God meets us, right? As we're going on our path for whatever we're looking to do.
I think I related to that. I think I saw somewhere that you have a master's degree in something called spiritual psychology. The
That is
first thing that
correct. That is
I
correct.
need is for you to tell me what spiritual psychology is,
Yeah.
and then tell me the value that added to your life, your toolkits, whatever.
Absolutely.
And then I promise we're going to start talking about this book, because I
Yeah,
want to
no
get to
worries.
some of
No,
these
this is
keys.
great. I loved my experience in spiritual psychology, getting my master's from University of Santa Monica. And when you think of psychology, the root word of psyche is actually breath of spirit.
Hmm.
Okay, so we think in our modern nomenclature that it's all about studying behavior and things like that, and that was part of it, but it's about how we access that spiritual aspect of ourselves. It was actually originally developed as a program for ministers to do counseling, right? So there was a lot of work in terms of working with clients, and it was probably 80% experiential. So we would have a topic we'd be learning, and then we go in trios. One would be the counselor or coach, one would be the client, and one would be the neutral observer. And then we would actually process. So not only are you learning the skills, but you're processing your own life, which is incredibly powerful. And probably one of the main contributors of that is the concept of what they call and what I call compassionate self-forgiveness,
Hmm.
which is, we think of forgiveness oftentimes of, someone does us wrong and we're going to forgive them for what they did for us. And it almost puts us in this position of righteousness, that we can now forgive you. We'll absolve you of all those bad things. But compassionate self-forgiveness is realizing that we are letting go of the aspect of ourselves that is creating the judgment, and how we oftentimes are the things we judge others for, we're projecting, really they're projections of what we're judging ourselves for. So when we have that healing and we realize, let's face it, there are people that do some really bad things here on earth. However, I believe that most of, if not all the bad things that are done because people really think they're probably trying to do the right thing, and they're coming from a standpoint of pain. And when you can work that away, now all of a sudden you see people differently and you can meet them on a different level. So that training for me was not only life-changing in my own life, but in my work that I do with my coaching clients, it was transformational.
Wow. Does compassionate self forgiveness have any relationship to that control word we were talking about a few minutes ago? And if so, how?
Well, I think so. And I also know that the root of the word compassion is conjoined with passion, which is,
Hmm.
compassion is to suffer with, right? And so creating that empathy. And then when you do find that, then yes, you're right. Then those things that we're trying to fight and hold on to, we can now surrender and let go of. And that's when the power comes. And man, those times in those 2 years that I studied there, I had some profound experiences around that concept in and of itself.
Wow. Excellent. Well, tell me about Black Belt Leadership: 7 Keys to Creating Life of Purpose by Discovering Your Inner Champion. First of all, I want to apologize. I typically will read some, if not all, of a book before I interview someone. I've actually got 4 interviews this week, so I'm a little bit behind in my prep,
Okay.
but so I have not been able to take a look at it. I apologize for that, but tell us about it and some of the origins of it, and then I may ask for you to give us a few of the keys.
Absolutely. Well, interestingly enough, the origin of it came when I was getting ready in 2008 to test for my 7th degree black belt.
Mm.
And one of the requirements that Grandmaster Lee has when you test is to create an essay on how martial arts has impacted your life. And so I came up with this idea, 7 degrees of black belt, 7 key principles of black belt leadership. And what I did during my testing is as I was performing physically and I would take breaks, I would have my students or my sons read one of those 7 qualities. So the first one being having a purposeful vision, the second one being the change we wish to see in the world, et cetera. Well, after that, I had a very dear friend of mine say, well, that's your keynote. That's what you can go out in the world and do. So I started speaking on it. And then the next thing I heard, well, that's your book. And so it's really the foundation of the principles that I teach and speak from. And it's basically a confluence of the great things that I learned in my martial art training, as well as what I've learned spiritually, spiritual psychology lessons, et cetera. With the point being that you don't need to be a black belt to be able to understand and engage those aspects in your life. We all can. I just happened to, spend 35 years kicking and punching before I put it all together. But any one of us can use those principles.
Yeah, and all right, so the first one is related to purpose and vision. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, so my guess is that that's somewhat foundational, correct?
Very foundational, because a vision is what gets me up in the morning, probably what got you to be doing this podcast. And we all know from a biblical standpoint that without a vision the people will perish, right? And so this standpoint of, I know I've learned in my life that when obstacles come forward, and in fact usually when the vision is bigger, the bigger the obstacle. But when we can hold on to that vision and we can hold on to why that vision is important to us, many times that's the tipping point that gets us through. Because when we look at it just from a tactical standpoint, a lot of times those things can go by the wayside. But when that vision comes from our heart, that's when magic happens. That's when
Right.
magic happens. Yeah.
So I've got, I think, 2 questions, maybe more. I'm not gonna lock myself down here related to this, because in what I do, because I'm a coach for organizations and for leaders also. I think we have probably very similar people that we work with, which is, I can tell it's such an honor for you to do that, and I'm so honored when I get to do it. It's like the ultimate form of discipleship and mentorship, and such a beautiful thing to do. But I also know that there are many people, it's the nature of the world we're in, that when we use terms like purpose, vision, I like to use assignment in the kingdom or something
Mhm.
like that, their eyes glaze over and they just have no concept, understanding. Can you speak to those people first? And then I've got a follow up question for another group. So, someone who's sitting there going, I have no clue what he's talking about with my purpose.
Right. Well, this is a process that I basically take my clients through when they are really have an aspect of they don't understand what their purpose is. There are many people, it's in the coaching world, having a purpose, that's a big idea. And then I've literally seen people get agitated, like, I don't know what my purpose is. And what I generally do is I say, take a look at your life from as far back as you can remember. And when were you happy, energized, fulfilled? And what were you doing and who were you serving during that time? And just make a laundry list of it. I mean, all the way back to kindergarten, if you can remember that far. And what were you doing? Who were you being? What were you doing during that time? And where were you feeling where you were truly alive? And then after you make that list, just see where the common thread is. And that common thread is most likely your purpose. And you were doing that purpose in different ways. The purpose wasn't necessarily for me to be a martial arts instructor. My purpose was to inspire, lead, teach, and empower others. I could do that in the corporate world. I could do it as a parent. I could do it as a martial arts teacher. So many times people connote the purpose with a career, And it's not really true. There are some people that are 100% on purpose raising their children, right? That's a purpose for them. So that's what I would say to everyone is, where have you had those times in your life? And when you step back and look at it from a 30,000 foot view, where's the thread? That's your purpose.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like I had something pop into my mind. Dig and look for clues, because the clues have been given to you all along the way, which you and I are in such good sync here, because my next question was going to be, did Grandmaster Lee speak your purpose into your life when you were 13 years old and you walked into that studio?
Absolutely. Because, the championship wasn't, at first I thought it was just in the ring, right? And I eventually did really well and was a national champion, et cetera. But man, later on, it's so funny because I didn't think about it for years, but then later on I would hear his voice, you become life champion. He had broken English, right? So I'd hear life champion, life champion. Wow, that's what he means. And it added such a broader context for me than, bowing in and kicking and punching in the ring. So absolutely he breathed that into me. And
Yeah,
what's so interesting is I've shared this story, of course, thousands of times. And I shared it one time with his son, who I was his son's teacher, his son's instructor. And we were joking around. We have a good relationship. He's like my little brother. And he's like, my dad tells that to everybody. And I said, yeah, but he said it to me. That's all that mattered. He said it to me. And so anyway.
excellent. Excellent. So, because I'm sitting here jumping back to reading what you said when we started: inspire, lead, teach, empower, which is a life champion. You know what I mean? All these things, gosh, they tie together so beautifully. So, man, that's exciting. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. All right,
Absolutely.
give us a little bit more. Give us some nuggets from the book. We'll make sure people know where to go get it. Now, is this the book you wrote during pandemic, or is this
No,
another book
no,
with,
no, no.
oh, tell us a few things
Yeah,
about the 7 keys, and then also give us a little synopsis of the other
absolutely.
book you wrote.
Thank you. Yeah, so the 7 keys are these 7 principles that I said that I created during that time, and it's about having a purposeful vision. It's about being the change we wish to see. Many of us walk around life as human doings, but we're really human beings, right? And if we want more success, if we want more collaboration, more compassion, more courage, start being that, right? Then do the things that support that way of being, and then you can have what you want. But many of us get those words, mixed around. We look at life from have, do, be. When I have this, then I'll be happy. But it starts with that inner journey. It starts with that inner growth, that inner manifestation. So that's number 2. The third one is integrity. And so what I mean by integrity is, a lot of times we connote that with honesty, but it's also about being true to not only others, but being true to ourselves. So listening to those voices, and also not so much always keeping our word, because sometimes it's difficult to do that, but honoring our word, because there's going to be times that we slip up. It's part of the human experience. But when we do slip up, make sure we take accountability for that. Even if you're a person, this is my opinion, if you're a person that's compulsively late, right? That lack of integrity, even if it's a couple minutes, it bleeds into other aspects of your life, right? And we all have those things, right? Whether it's eating too much sugar or it's being late for meetings or whatever, but that's what I mean by integrity. I'm going to grab the book here so I make sure that I don't miss
Yeah.
one of them for you, because
As
since
you
there's
got
7 of them.
integrity, now go ahead there, because I want to chime in on that integrity, because actually just yesterday I was doing some study in scripture,
Yeah,
as a follower of Jesus, I always like to read the red letters, and he was just, this is my words, not scriptural. He was going off on hypocrites and Pharisees, and when you said integrity, the word hypocrite came to mind, because it's when your thoughts and words and actions aren't in alignment.
absolutely.
And I thought that was extremely powerful. So anyway, yeah, I'd love it if you could kind of hit us just maybe real quickly with the other 4,
Yeah, absolutely.
and then we're coming in for a landing here.
Okay.
So excellent.
Very, very good. Well, number 4 is conscious persistence. And the reason I titled it Conscious Persistence is we all, as human beings, and particularly those that have achieved success in particular areas of life, we're probably pretty persistent in what we do. I mean, you got to where you're at, I've got to where I'm at because we continued. But how often are we doing that and we're not even conscious of our actions? And I like a joke with audiences, think about the last time you left a meeting, you drove 40 minutes home, and as you were driving up the driveway, you had no clue how you got there because you weren't present. And so it's not necessarily about being persistent, it's about being conscious and persistent about the right things. So that's what I mean by that principle. Number 5 is probably my favorite. It's compassionate service. I just think that when we are in leadership positions, it's like, the old Spider-Man thing, to those to whom much is given, much is expected. I think that was, or maybe it was great. With great strength comes great responsibility. That was Peter Parker. But anyway, they're both the same. And it's like, we have just beautiful opportunity to serve in our lives. And particularly when I am in the places where I feel the most challenged and I'm not feeling good about things, a lot of people are dealing with depression and suicidal ideation, et cetera. When we serve others, that's when we begin to light up as human beings, because we're really all connected in that way. So that's the 5th one. Number 5 or 6, I alluded to before, it's about acceptance and surrender. So, I think of if you remember the movie, what's the one with Tom Cruise, or why am I blanking on it now? Where he was in Japan, The Last Samurai.
Oh yeah.
And he's getting his butt kicked by one of the samurai during a sparring session with the bokken, which is the wooden sword. And his host says, "You have too many mind. Mind on your opponent, mind on people watching, mind on the sword, too many mind." And it's about surrendering to the moment. And he gets present and he basically fights the guy to a draw, right? And how many times are we overlooking those places where we could surrender to something bigger than ourselves? And then the final one is, none of this is any good if we don't take action, right? So it's taking inspired action. It's like, I think it was Tony La Russa, the late Dodger manager who just passed away, said, there are 3 types of people in this world: people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people that look around and say, what just happened, right? And so it's about taking that action. And even if it's small steps, but each and every day taking a step toward where we want to go. So those are the seven qualities of black belt leadership.
Those are so good. And I would so love to dig into each one of those, but here's what we're going to do at this point. We're going to recommend that the listener go get the book. We'll leave some links, and I'll let you mention where they could find that shortly. But in the few minutes that we have, all right, so that's that book. Give us just a quick glimpse of kind of the next thing that's coming up for you. You just finished a book, and tell us a little bit about that. And then we're going to start wrapping up. I always joke with people, my start wrapping up could be like the first encore of a Bruce Springsteen concert. We may have 3 or 4 wrap ups, but go ahead.
Got it. Well, the latest book, I just happen to have it here, Tim.
Yay.
But it's called Breaking Through. And this came about because I do a corporate board breaking experience workshop. So I just did one this weekend here in Denver, where I literally have people take a board that we break in martial arts, and they write the breakthrough they want to experience in their life, business, relationships on one side. The other side, they write the limiting beliefs that have held them back. And then I coach them how to break the board. Now, I've had people have had amazing experience breaking the board. And I see people around in town in Denver and hey, that board's still in my office. I love that experience. But I often wondered, did they really have their breakthrough? I mean, after we left, did you really have it? And that really gnawed at me. So I thought, well, I wrote this book. I have 3 principles. Actually, there's 10 chapters to it about how do you actually take that idea of having a breakthrough and what are the practical steps you can take to make it happen. And it's based on having, clarity in your vision again, creating a plan, and then taking consistent action so you can make that a reality in your life. And that's literally just went up on Amazon this week. So.
Wow, congratulations. That's excellent.
Thank you.
So for those that might be watching this on the live version, they could go ahead and get that. And I may ask you, or hopefully someone on my team can jump down and put the link in the comments. But definitely, if you're listening by the time the podcast or YouTube comes out, it is available. And so those are some great resources. Let me see which encore question I want to get to first. because I've got a lot of them floating around here, Chris. Um, First thing, I saw this, and boy, I'd love to just hear it briefly. You went on, it's kind of a famous hike walk through Spain. I
Mhm.
think it said you did it about 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
But could you tell just briefly about that? And then I'm going to ask you a few questions to really wrap up. I'm serious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what you're referring to is the walk called the Camino de Santiago.
Yeah.
So it is a 800-kilometer, 500-mile walk across northern Spain. So people have been doing it for probably the last 1,000 years. In fact, Saint Francis of Assisi was one of the more famous people that did it. It started out in the early days of the church almost as a means of penance. So pilgrims would go to
Mhm.
absolve themselves from their indiscretions. And it's later on become just a walk for people to get a greater spiritual connection from within. And I'd always wanted to do it. And so I had a whole series of amazing circumstances happen back in May of 2014, where I did it, walked it in I came in the morning of my 29th day, walked about, what was it, I guess, 17, 18 miles a day, slept in hostels all over across northern Spain, started out in Western France. You go up into the Pyrenees Mountains, you descend into Spain, and then you literally, most of the time I walked by myself, but then I would meet people from all over the world, all over the world. And the lessons, because the way you walk the Camino is generally how you were doing your life. So I realized at the halfway point that I was walking the Camino like an athletic event, like something I just needed to get through. And I had a pretty profound experience that shook me out of that. And the next 2 weeks I slowed it down. And that's when all the blessings were there. Yeah,
Wow. So you got a reminder that it's important to enjoy the journey.
totally. And I was so, in fact, it's interesting, like most things that we develop habitually, I was totally unconscious to what I was doing until
Mm.
somebody asked me a question. If I might, I went by this one morning. I was, I'd get up early in the morning, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'm on the trail and I'm walking in this village, and I walk past this doorway that caught my eye, and I go about 10 paces, and I thought, I need to check that out. And I go back, and over the door it says refuge for the peregrinos, refuge for the pilgrims. And I begin to step inside, and all of a sudden my monkey mind goes, it's a tourist trap, don't go in, they'll blah blah blah. So I leave and I go on my way. Well, the next day I've hiked again, and I had run into a great group of Americans and Canadians. And I walk into a restaurant, they see me and they wave me over. So I sit at the head table, they've already started eating. And the guy on the left of me is from San Francisco. And he says, hey, how about we all share our stories about the best part of the Camino so far? He goes, I'll start. Did anybody stop by the refuge for the Peregrinos yesterday? He goes, man, I went in there. They gave me cookies. Soft music was playing. I drank tea. I read a book for 2 hours. It was the best thing I did. And you remember Fred Flintstone? We used to get embarrassed and he'd shrink like that. That's what I did. And I sheepishly raised my hand and I told him the story. And I said, I'm committing right now to slow down. And that was the greatest gift, one of the greatest gifts of the Camino.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, because I've
Yeah.
heard about that. I think there's been some movies about it and other
Yes.
things
Yeah.
like that. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so it sounds like you've learned something that all of us need to learn, or you were reminded about enjoying the journey. And what great journey you've been on and continue to be on. Chris, I'd love for you to tell us, what is your ideal client, or if someone wanted to really reach out to you, and maybe the speaking world is going to start opening up a little bit more, hopefully soon. And but I know you coach, you've got your books and all that. Who should reach out to you and try to find you? And then I'm going to ask you how they need to do that in just a second.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. Well, from a speaking standpoint, corporate teams that are sales teams are great for me. People that are looking to break through. And I've worked with realtors in the past. I've worked with all sorts of teams that have sales, in their mind. They're service oriented. I think I work well with those teams that are coming together and wanting to have breakthrough results, but also not just have breakthrough results, but don't do it at the risk of having the other elements of their life go out of whack. It's like I often say, we're never balanced, but we're always balancing, right? And so how do you navigate that? And how do you have those breakthroughs in all aspects of your life? So corporate, from a speaking standpoint, in terms of individual coaching clients, I think I do really well with entrepreneurs. Even though I had the corporate experience, people are looking to, they have their own businesses, they're small business owners. They're looking, how do I lead my staff effectively? How do I bring self-leadership to my own life? Those are the people that tend to gravitate toward me and that I can do my best work with.
That's good. That's because they're going after that growth or champion
Yeah.
mindset. And
I'll tell
there's
you
such
what, I think that being an entrepreneur, not that you can't have it corporately, but being an entrepreneur was one of the greatest personal development, spiritual development growths I've ever had, because I couldn't hide anywhere. It was me. I had to look at myself if I was going to be successful.
Yeah. Chris, we'll include it in the notes, but how can people connect with you if they want to reach out to you, find your resources, books, and things like that? Go ahead and give it verbally, and we'll make sure people can see it in the notes that we have.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, they can just go to my website, which is www.chrisnatzke.com. It's all one word, CHRIS, N as in Navy, ATZ as in zebra, KE.com. And go to my website, you'll see all my programs. You go to my store, that's where you can get my books and other programs that I have. And also, if anyone wants to set up a time, contact me and just have a one-on-one complimentary coaching session or something, and talk about something, see if there's a match for that. I'd love to have that conversation.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to reach out and get the books and read those. And I encourage people to connect with you. We are Seek, Go, Create here, Chris, and 3 words. Which one of those jumps out at you more than the other two when I say those 3 words, and why? Last question I've got for you here.
Yeah, I guess it's the word create. And the reason I say that is I have a very strong belief that everything in our lives is twice created. It's first created in our mind, right? And then it's created through the work that we do. And we could argue that creation in mind can be inspired, from something higher than us, which I believe that it is. But it's when we put that element together and we look at the creation mode as a co-creation, if you will, that's when I think we're at our best and our most powerful. So that's the one that resonates best with me.
Wow. Chris, I knew I would enjoy this conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know it was a blessing for those that listened in. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you've been listening to this, we would highly encourage you to continue the conversation. And we listed a few places to do that. You could go to any of our socials. We're Seek, Go, Create on all the socials: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And like I mentioned at the beginning, also Clubhouse. Or you could go to our website, seekgocreate.com. Make sure we've got your best email address, because that's how you could stay up to date with all that we're doing. And remember that we drop a new episode every Monday, and we'll have another great one next week and the next week and the next week. So make sure that you're subscribed. And I just encourage you to continue being all that you were created to be.